to come to the table. You know the drill, Senator. Appreciate your research on this issue.
If you don't mind, I'll be joined by my staffer, Greg Ostrander.
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Well, I think as we just, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it, committee personnel, our representatives, for the opportunity to go off and share some of our experiences in our office. I think with the previous incident here, we have ample evidence that sometimes digital systems don't work as well as analog systems. So I really want to kind of highlight today that we're talking about a topic that talks about or deals with a very unique responsibility that we have as legislators. Prior to us serving, it was deemed necessary that we would have a regulated utility market in Michigan for electricity. We don't have these types of discussions that we're going to have here today around where you buy your gas. We don't have these discussions about where you buy your groceries, because that is on a free market. We don't have a free market here. Previous representatives determined that it's in the public interest that we should have a regulated utility market. And so as part of that public interest, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that the services that are delivered as a result of this decision are done so that they do indeed represent the public interests of those we serve. Now, today what I'd like to do is share some observations that we've made in regards to the shut-off practices, but also I want to talk a little bit, if I may, Mr. Chair, about the restoration practices, because it's not just a matter of what the process by which they shut them off, but it's also also the process by which they're restored. So, and I come from a district where our electricity is delivered primarily by DTE, so we'll be focusing on some observations around DTE service. And I should also point out that we do appreciate the recent actions by the MPSC to drill down on this issue a little bit more in depth, but obviously, and you're going to see from this testimony, that further action is necessary. So today what we're going to talk about is the fact that, number one, DTE didn't follow multiple rules that are already established. Number two, ratepayers inappropriately were shut off. Plus, it took a long time for the power to be restored. There's multiple rules that need to be reformed in addition to the ones that were not adhered to. And current utility reporting is not sufficient to detect the actual problems, ensure faster restoration, and allow for sufficient oversight. So once again, don't want to forget about the fact that we got to talk about restoration, not just shut off. All right, so power is required by rule to be restored in the same day after the first working day, but allows for exceptions, such as except for reasons beyond its control. Clearly, that's fairly open-ended statement. The reality from my office experience is that there are many people waiting 5 days or longer because of a multi-step process to restore power and due to delays. So we need to define what is beyond control. So some of the specific rules that need to be reformed are: let people who want to simply pay their bills and keep an analog meter keep their power. And I know you're a big advocate of that, and we testified earlier in support of House Bill 4220, which has provisions that would lead towards that. Number two, we need to enforce that shutoff notices occur and are documented in writing. And a lot of these notices that we're getting, or a lot of anecdotal stories we're hearing, is that there is no written notice, and it's done via verbal assessments. And Ms. Chimner actually just kind of corroborated that in her recent testimony. Number three, you can't prematurely shut off power. It's not to be used as a weapon. I'm not a big fan of bullies. Number four, you need to clarify that wanting to keep an analog meter is not a safety violation. We've had these meters in place for decades. They've worked effectively without any problems. There's a lot of cases to be made that the smart meters themselves, whether they're put in dumb mode, if you will, or turned off for the emissions, or whether or not they're actually fully functional, represent more of a hazard than the previous analog meters. Number five, we need to honor the intent and purpose of the Senior Protection Program, and we do need penalties for violations. And number six, new computer systems should not be rolled out before they are ready. Case in point. All right, so the current reporting in particular is not sufficient because number one, under Rule 33, utilities currently report the number of shutoffs to the MPSC. This does not provide sufficient detail to identify the reason for these shutoffs and or how long it took to actually restore the power. We need oversight, and that can't occur without sufficient data around shutoffs and restoration practices. We also need to have some ratepayer input. Many who contacted my office felt that they had trouble lodging a formal complaint with the state, so we're not serving their public interest, if you will, and we need to do a better job. If we're going to take on the job of regulating these utilities in the context of what is in the public interest, then we have to be interested in the public. And sometimes they told me that they could not file a complaint or actually leave their information. So, and we know government can be complex at times, and so we don't need to make that unduly complex. So, some key questions I think we should all be asking is, number one, how can the state detect problems faster? Number two, how can ratepayers be better accommodated? Shutoffs should not be a common practice. And number three, what ramifications for utility exist when rules are broken, and how many ratepayers are actually made whole? Ratepayers in Michigan can't vote with their feet because of our regulated utility market. So we have to do better, and we have to assume responsibility for that customer service because we're the ones that are focused on making sure that they don't have choice and the ability to go off and walk with their feet like you can when you have a gas station with the prices too high, or when you have a oil service place that's not where you want, or you got a grocery store that's not carrying the goods that you want. You have choice in those cases. We do not have choice when it comes to electricity, and I just ask for your support in looking at legislation and looking for that affects some of the rule changes that we're talking about and holds MPSC accountable and holds utilities accountable for actually abiding by these rules. So without further ado, just open it up for any questions you may have, Mr. Chair.
Senator and members of the committee, PSC, and I think you provided me a copy, but the PSC issued some kind of statement in the last several weeks that outlined all the different reasons for cutoffs, but they don't ask how many of each one takes place. So just be aware that I've asked DTE when they testify on January 30th to provide that information.
Good.
And obviously PSC so we can quantify it. Also, is the senior citizens policy referred to, is that the one that deals with various medical conditions, or is that a separate set of
I believe
standards?
It's separate, so it's November to what, April? There's a moratorium.
So between the dates of November 1st and March 31st, if a person that lives there is age 65 or older, they are not supposed to be turned off for any reason. I believe part of the history is that goes back to 7 years ago when there was that gentleman who tragically died up in Bay City. And you have to take into account seniors. They may be living by themselves. They have multiple health issues. And it was interesting when November came and our office received calls from people that were age 65 or older and were saying that DTE was threatening to turn them off. And we did have people that were age 65 and older that did indeed get shut off. And there was even some confusion initially within the MPSC that the senior protection program only applied to people who couldn't pay their bills. Well, first of all, it's just nonsensical, because if we're trying to make sure that seniors aren't dying for no valid reason, the fact that they can't pay their bills versus it being another reason really doesn't make the point. Now, Chairman Talberg did clarify later that also AMI shutoffs should not happen to people age 65 or older between the dates of November 1st and March 31st. But again, why DTE was not able to follow that rule correctly, we don't know. As the investigation that was opened up by the MPSC on December 20th showed, DTE's new computer system appeared to have lots of glitches, so we don't know if they didn't know the person's age. Sometimes it appeared within DTE, one hand didn't know what the other hand was doing. Somebody would hear that they're safe, and then a couple weeks later they get a knock on the door saying that we're going to shut you off. So it was a very confusing time that took a few months to clarify We hope that DTE right now is not sending notices or shutting off people that are age 65 or older, but I received 3 emails yesterday that sound like they still are that I need to investigate. So that's an example of one of the rules that doesn't appear to be getting followed, and you know, we have people age 65 or older that our office has been talking to. They were without power for 5, 6, 7 days. It's cold. We're really blessed that we have not had of another tragedy like what happened in Bay City.
And sir, did we get your name for the record?
My name is Greg Ostrander.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Yeah, PSC's statement a couple of weeks ago was listing all the various reasons based on their investigation. Non-payment, obviously, but I think what we're hearing from mostly today are people who have paid and have been cut off. But PSC found also meter tampering. Maybe that's the category under which they include smart meters. Theft, moving in or out, and not getting proper authorization when you occupy a new dwelling, or emergency safety hazards called by police and fire, computer glitches, and the new program, the new billing program, billing errors are all the various reasons. But we don't know what percentage falls into each, but we have asked DTE to provide that to us.
One quick point that was interesting from the initial U-case filing that was done, DTE, according to the MPSC, did inappropriately shut off 288 families. That's what we know as a baseline. The procedures were not followed in 288 cases. So we don't know exactly how all of those are going to be broken down, and hopefully we'll get that, but 288 is a big number. From the hearing I attended at the MPSC on December 20th, and I don't know if somebody from the MPSC will be testifying today, but there were, for example, people that either weren't getting billed or were on the program where they get the equal amount every month, and it's kind of out of their mind that the system was showing them as not having paid, and they were just cut off without notice. And the safety issue, or the so-called meter tampering, what that appears to come down a lot is the people that do put a bar or a lock over their meter. And the way the MPSC has changed some rules, they are now trying to categorize that as a safety violation. And it just seems very nonsensical that a bar over a meter, that a desperate person like maybe the Chimners is just trying to keep their analog meter on there until a bill like HB 4220 can be passed, can somehow be deemed as meter tampering or doing something unsafe. And turning the power off to a person in the middle of winter, that's what's unsafe.
I know that I attended a wind energy meeting in Lapeer County a couple of months ago, and 3 different people that one night handed me their letters, their threat letters from DTE. Don't know whether or not they eventually got cut off or not. How exactly is the power cut off? Is it as simple as flipping a switch? I had a lady with me in the elevator who said they brought a lift truck and they physically cut the line at the pole out on the street.
Yes, yeah.
So typically with the calls that we're getting, and certainly with AMI now, for where it is rolled out, if there is a computer glitch and the computer shows that they've not paid when maybe they have or they haven't been billed, that power can just be cut off remotely. For the people that have been dealing with the AMI shutoffs...
What is AMI?
Advanced Metering Infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
For the people, though, that have been cut off at the pole, that's where the restoration in particular has been very problematic, because the typical scenario that our office has seen as people have contacted us is they get cut off at the pole. They usually take a day to be in the cold before they decide they need to capitulate. They really want to keep that analog meter. But I tell you, you try living without power in the cold for just 24 hours, and you give up pretty quick. So when that ratepayer, quote unquote, gives up, and I don't mean that in a pejorative manner, they were then having trouble getting DTE to actually acknowledge that they wanted the new meter. So at that point, maybe they'd spend 1, 2, 3 days trying to get to DTE and say, yes, we'll take your digital meter. It would then maybe be 1, 2, or 3 days before the digital meter would come out. But when that person came out, oftentimes they would say, we need to have a different person come out to deactivate that meter. That could be another 2 to 3 days. And then after the meter was deactivated, it might be 1, 2, or 3 days before somebody came and did the work at the pole. And so that was one reason why some of these shutoffs took so long to be restored, because instead of DTE coming out and saying, hey, here's already a deactivated meter, we're going to do the pole work on the same day, it was this three-step process. And so the pole process really needs to be looked at in terms of the rules, or we have to acknowledge how long people would be without power.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I mean, obviously, Greg is a wealth of information on it because he's the one answering the actual phone calls with a lot of these people. And we're getting phone calls from a lot of different areas because our office has been recognized as somebody that will listen to their issue. And I encourage all the representatives that are here to make sure that they investigate what's actually going on in their respective districts, because this is not unique to the 7th Senate District, obviously. So I want to, first of all, take a little bit of a moment to commend Greg, because he's delved into the details on this significantly, and I appreciate all of his service in this capacity.
Thank you, Senator. I know, as I mentioned earlier, that Representative Cox and Representative Tice have brought to my attention over the holidays that their offices were getting a lot of calls about this. So I don't know if it's limited just to Southeast Michigan or not. Any other questions? Representative Lauer.
So when they do the cutoff at the pole, that's because the meter was blocked or locked in some fashion. Is that what you're telling us?
In the majority of the cases it was, but in some cases, and you know, all these for me as a staffer, they become a little bit of a he said, she said. And when you hear these cases the first time, you're doing your best to be kind of a neutral arbiter. But in some cases, it appeared there would just be verbal altercations or a DTE. And I want to be clear, Mr. Rodney Cole at DTE has been very helpful to me in trying to expedite power getting turned back on when I've identified somebody who's been without power for 3-5 days. So I don't mean to unnecessarily besmirch DTE here, but we had enough calls from enough constituents where sometimes it just seemed that the DTE staffer, whether they felt they had power, whether they were done with debating the person, they just decided that they wanted to cut it off at the pole, even if there was not a physical lock on the meter. And indeed, a lot of the shutoff notices that people were receiving that were due to AMI issues, when I would investigate that with Rodney and when I would talk to the ratepayer, locks were not on all of those. And many people were getting power turned off even though they did not have locks on their meter. So certainly some of the cuts at the pole were due to locks being at the meter, but if I had to guess, that was maybe just about 50%.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Senator. And if we're now ready to queue up that television report from Detroit.